a virgin to melt the ice of a heart that swore never to love again. He had buried his heart with his first wife. She would arrive tonight to unearth it. Duke Thane Whitlock did not yet know it, but his ordered, controlled life was about to be turned upside down by a woman who would refuse to be just another piece on the kingdom's political chessboard. A woman who would challenge him, provoke him, and finally conquer him in ways he had never thought possible. If you're already curious to see how the Duke will fall, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. The night covered the kingdom of Avarice like a velvet black mantle, sprinkled with stars that looked like diamonds scattered by the gods. Grafen Castle rose imposingly against the dark sky, its high towers slicing the clouds like stone blades. In the great hall, fire danced in the hearth, casting restless shadows along the walls of ancient stone. Duke Thane Whitlock stood before the flames, a figure carved of marble and resolve. His broad shoulders bore the weight of years of responsibility, and his gray eyes surveyed the world with the calculated coldness of one who had learned that trust was a dangerous luxury. Every line of his severe face told a story of loss, of duty fulfilled at any cost. "Thane!" King Balthor Leclerc's voice echoed through the hall like restrained thunder, making him turn slowly. "Come here, my old friend. We must speak." The Duke inclined his head respectfully, though his eyes remained sharp. He knew that tone well. It was the same the king used when he was about to move an important piece on the kingdom's political board. "Your Majesty." Thane approached with measured steps, each movement controlled with military precision. "I am at your service as always." Balthor smiled, but there was something mischievous in his gaze, something that made Thane's stomach tighten. "Sit down, Thane. This conversation requires patience." The Duke remained standing, crossing his arms over his chest. "I prefer to stand, Your Majesty, especially when I sense I am not going to like what I am about to hear." A deep laugh rolled from the king's lips, always straight to the point. "That is why you are my most valuable advisor." Balthor paused dramatically, savoring the moment. "But even the most valuable men have needs, and you, my dear Duke, have neglected yours for far too long." Thane felt his muscles stiffen. "If Your Majesty is referring to my marital state." "To your solitary state, yes." The king rose, striding closer with the confidence of absolute power. 3 years of mourning are more than enough, Thane. Your heart may be in hibernation, but your duty to the crown and your lineage cannot wait any longer. Majesty, with all due respect, my personal life stopped being personal the moment you became my chief advisor. Balthor's voice hardened slightly. "You need an heir. The kingdom needs stability. Do you, my friend, need something more to warm you than that fireplace?" Thane clenched his fists, struggling to maintain control. "And I suppose Your Majesty already has a solution in mind?" The king's smile turned almost predatory. "Naturally. Ariane Selene, daughter of one of the noblest families of Amaranth. Intelligent, beautiful, and," he paused theatrically, "completely untouched. Perfect virgin to melt the ice around your heart and warm the bed that has been far too long empty." Thane's blood froze and boiled all at once. The king's provocation was calculated, designed to unnerve him. "Majesty, surely there are other ways to establish trade alliances." "Contracts do not warm hearths in a harsh winter," Balthor retorted, leaning forward with the weight of authority. "The northern provinces' harvests have failed 2 consecutive seasons. We need Amaranth's grain corridors and golden oil, as much as they need our garrisons guarding the Strait of Vair from corsairs." His eyes gleamed with political cunning. "A signature seals only papers. A marriage seals destinies and future generations." Thane nodded slowly, the strategist within him recognizing the flawless political maneuver. "When will Amaranth's delegation arrive?" "She arrives tonight." Balthor cut his words with absolute authority. "The alliance with Amaranth will be sealed through this marriage. You will wed her in 1 week, 1 week." Thane's voice came out harsher than intended. "Your Majesty cannot simply—" "I can, and I will." The king patted Thane's shoulder, a gesture meant to be paternal, but that landed like a sentence. "Perhaps a young virgin is precisely what you need to remember. You are still a man of flesh and blood, not just a ghost wandering these halls." Before Thane could reply, the great doors of the hall opened with a solemn echo. A herald entered, bowing deeply. "Your Majesty, Lady Ariane Solène of Amaranth has arrived." Thane felt as though the air had been sucked from the room. His destiny was about to walk through that door, and he had no choice but to face it. "Perfect." Balthor rubbed his hands together with evident satisfaction. "Send her in. It is time for our Duke to meet his bride." Ariane Solène entered the hall like a golden storm. Her honey-colored hair caught the firelight, creating a halo that seemed almost otherworldly. Her eyes, deep blue like a summer sky, swept the room with a mix of curiosity and something more. A silent determination that made Thane blink in surprise. She was not what he had expected. Where he anticipated timidity, he found a straight posture. Where he expected submission, he saw a chin lifted with her own dignity. The sapphire blue gown she wore moved with her like water, and every step resounded with a confidence that echoed through the stone hall. "Lady Ariane Solène," the king announced with obvious satisfaction. "Allow me to present to you Duke Thane Whitlock of Grayfen, your future husband." Ariane's eyes locked with Thane's, and the silence in the hall grew heavy, as though even the flames in the hearth hesitated to crackle. She did not lower her gaze, did not blush, did not tremble. Instead, she studied him with the same intensity with which he regarded her, as if she were weighing not only his appearance but his soul. "Your Grace." Her voice was melodious, but steel lay beneath the velvet. She offered a flawless curtsy, but there was something in her movements that suggested she did it by choice, not out of fear. Thane inclined his head, battling the strange sensation that this woman was unlike any he had ever known. "Lady Solène." His voice came out rougher than he intended. "Welcome to Grayfen Castle." A brief smile touched her lips, but it did not reach her eyes. "Thank you, Your Grace, I must say it is fascinating to finally meet the man with whom my life will be entwined." There was something in the way she said fascinating that made Thane's skin prickle. It was not fear in her voice nor excessive reverence. It was something far more dangerous. It was genuine interest. The king, watching their exchange with obvious delight, decided to provoke them further. "Lady Ariane, I hope you are prepared for a challenge. Our Duke is not exactly known for his warmth." Ariane turned to the king, but Thane did not miss the spark of amusement that flashed in her eyes. "Your Majesty, I have found that the greatest treasures are often hidden beneath the coldest surfaces." She looked back at Thane, and this time her smile was genuine, almost conspiratorial. "I have the patience to dig." The provocation was subtle, delivered with such elegance it could have passed for courtesy. But Thane felt it like both a caress and a challenge. This woman would not be easily intimidated or controlled. "An interesting philosophy, Lady Solène." Thane stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "I hope your perseverance proves as strong as your confidence." "Oh, Your Grace." Ariane tilted her head slightly, and when she looked at him again, there was something new in her eyes, something that made Thane's heart pound despite himself. "Something tells me that uncovering your secrets will be..." She paused deliberately, letting the tension between them stretch taut like a drawn bowstring. "The most interesting adventure of my life." The silence that followed was charged with electricity. Thane felt something stir in his chest, something he had long believed dead. This woman, this virgin the king had chosen to warm him, had just declared war in a way he had never faced before, not with swords or politics, but with the silent promise that she would be far more than he had ever bargained for. The king, clearly delighted with the dynamic unfolding before his eyes, clapped his hands once. "Perfect. You two will get along marvelously." His smile was that of a cat who had just trapped two mice in a cage together. "The wedding will be in 1 week. I suggest you use this time to get better acquainted." Thane watched as Ariane bid the king a graceful farewell, her movements fluid and controlled. But when she passed by him on her way to the door, she stopped for only a second and lifted her gaze to meet his. She said nothing. She did not need to. In that look was a silent challenge, an unspoken promise that made every muscle in Thane's body tighten like a bow about to release. It was the look of someone who would not be easily conquered, but who also would not back away from battle. And with that, she left the hall, leaving behind only the echo of her steps and the subtle scent of jasmine and something wilder, something that reminded Thane of distant storms and dangerous promises. Thane remained still, staring at the door through which she had vanished, one crystalline certainty forming in his mind. His life had just become infinitely more complicated. She has fire, does she not? Balthor's amused voice cut through his thoughts. Perhaps that is exactly what you need to melt all that ice, my old friend. Before Thane could respond, the hall doors opened again, and members of the council began to file in for the evening meeting. Voices mingled over harvests, taxes, and border defenses, but the Duke's mind remained fixed on the image of defiant, blue eyes and the echo of a presence that had turned the hall into something entirely different than it had been only minutes before. As he took his place at the council table, one single question pounded in his mind. Who exactly was Ariane Solène? Dawn painted the gardens of Greyfen Castle in shades of gold, turning the rose bushes into resplendent jewels covered in dew. The morning breeze carried the fragrance of lavender and the melodic song of birds nesting among the ancient cypress trees. It was in this sanctuary of beauty and tranquility that Thane usually sought peace before beginning his daily duties. But today, as he turned the corner of the boxwood maze, he stopped abruptly. Ariane Solène was kneeling by a bed of white roses, her light blue linen skirt spread gracefully around her like fallen petals. She held a rose delicately between her fingers, observing it with a concentration that seemed almost reverent. Her golden hair shone in the morning light, loose in soft waves that framed her serene profile. There was something in the image that made him hesitate, a purity almost ethereal, so different from the defiant woman he had met the night before. For a moment she seemed to belong to that garden, as though she had sprouted from the very earth along with the flowers. They are beautiful, are they not? Ariane lifted her eyes without showing surprise at his presence, as if she had known he was there for some time. White roses have a different kind of beauty, less obvious than the red, more mysterious. Thane stepped closer slowly, keeping his expression carefully neutral. Lady Solène, I did not expect to find you here so early. I woke before dawn. She rose with fluid movements, brushing the soil from her hands with practical elegance. In Amaranth, we often say that gardens reveal their secrets only to those who visit them, while the world is still silent. And what secrets have these gardens revealed to you? Ariane tilted her head, an enigmatic smile touching her lips, that even the hardiest flowers need constant care to bloom, and that some of the most beautiful grow precisely in the places where they seem least likely to survive. There was something in the way she spoke, layers of meaning, woven into words that seemed simple, that made Thane feel as though he were playing chess against an opponent whose strategies he could not yet fathom. An interesting philosophy. He clasped his hands behind his back, assuming a more formal posture. I imagine in Amaranth the expectations for a lady are different from ours. Oh, the expectations are very similar, Your Grace. Ariane began walking down the stone path, forcing him to follow. A lady is expected to be beautiful, obedient, fertile, and silent. The question is whether a clever lady chooses to meet those expectations, or redefine what they mean. The answer caught him off guard. There was a sharp intelligence in her words, wrapped in such elegant delivery that it nearly disguised their provocative nature. And you, Lady Solène? How do you choose to deal with these expectations? She stopped beside a marble fountain where golden fish swam in lazy circles, and dipped her hand into the crystal-clear water. I believe true strength does not lie in breaking rules unnecessarily, but in mastering them so completely that you become indispensable within them. Thane watched her as she played with the water, noting the way her fingers moved with calculated grace. Every gesture seemed deliberate, every word chosen with precision. This was not the naive young woman he had expected, a sophisticated strategy. Strategy is an interesting word. Your Grace. Ariane lifted her eyes to meet his, and once again he felt that strange impact, as though she could see through the layers of control he had built over the years. It implies that we are at war, are we not? The question slipped out before he could contain it, more direct than he intended. Ariane smiled, not the diplomatic smile from the night before, but something more genuine and infinitely more dangerous. Perhaps. But in every war, Your Grace, victory belongs to the one who best understands the battlefield. She moved away from the fountain, stepping closer to him with measured grace. And I always make certain to study the terrain very well before taking any position. She was close enough now that he could feel the warmth radiating from her skin, see the golden flecks in her blue eyes. There was something hypnotic in the way she moved, a confidence that did not come from youth or beauty, but from something deeper. And what have your observations told you about this particular terrain? That it is far more complex than it appears at first glance. Ariane reached out, and for one startling moment he thought she would touch him. Instead, her fingers brushed away a rose petal that had settled on his shoulder. Some things that appear dead on the outside are still very much alive within, merely sleeping. The touch was so brief he almost doubted it had happened, yet the impact was like a lightning strike. Thane felt his muscles tighten, a visceral reaction that irritated him deeply. "Careful, Lady Selene." His voice came out lower than he intended, carrying a warning even he did not fully understand. "Some things sleep for very good reasons, or out of fear." Her reply came without hesitation, delivered with a softness that did not blunt its sharp edge. But fear, however understandable, is rarely a good reason to waste an entire life. For a moment they remained like that, so close Thane could count every golden eyelash, feel each gentle breath. There was defiance in her eyes, yes, but also something more, a genuine curiosity, as though she were trying to solve a particularly fascinating riddle. "You speak as though you know something about wasting lives." He stepped back, creating physical distance but keeping his gaze locked on hers. "A young woman of your age and position can hardly have experience in such somber philosophies." Something shifted in Ariane's expression, a flash of something deeper, more genuine, before her elegant mask slid back into place. "Age rarely has much correlation with the depth of experience, Your Grace. And as for position..." She lifted her shoulders in studied elegance. "Sometimes gilded cages teach lessons as valuable as stone dungeons." The phrase hung between them, laden with implications Thane could not fully decipher. This woman was a puzzle, each answer revealing new questions, each layer uncovered hinting at even deeper ones beneath. "Gilded cages," he repeated the words slowly, savoring them. "An interesting description for a life of privilege. Privilege and freedom are very different concepts. Your Grace." Ariane began walking again, this time toward the heart of the garden, where a white marble pavilion rose among ancient cypresses. A person may have all the gold in the world and still be imprisoned, just as another may have very little and yet be completely free. And you, Lady Selene, do you consider yourself imprisoned or free? She laughed, a low musical sound that made something inside his chest twist strangely. "That, Your Grace, is a very dangerous question to ask a woman who is about to marry a man she barely knows." "Dangerous how?" Ariane stopped beneath the pavilion, where the shadows of the columns cast intricate patterns across her face. When she looked at him again, there was a new intensity in her eyes that set every nerve in Thane's body on edge. Because the honest answer may not be what you expect to hear, and men in positions of power rarely appreciate surprises, especially the kind that come from their wives. The word wives hung between them like both a promise and a threat. Thane felt something shift inside his chest, a dangerous curiosity he had not experienced in a very long time. "Perhaps I am more tolerant of surprises than you imagine." "Perhaps." Ariane tilted her head, studying him with almost microscopic focus. "But tolerance and appreciation are very different things. The question is, do you truly want to know the woman you are going to marry? Or do you prefer the convenient version you can shape to suit your needs?" The question struck him like a blow to the stomach. For a moment, Thane found himself without an answer, confronted with a truth he was not prepared to examine. "You have a very direct way of questioning, Lady Selene. And you, Your Grace, have a very skilled way of avoiding answers." Touché. She had turned the game on him with the ease of someone who had played chess since childhood. Thane felt a spark of something he had not experienced in years, genuine intellectual respect. "Very well." He stepped closer, adopting a more relaxed stance, allowing a little of his true self to surface. "The honest answer is that I do not know. I have spent so long fulfilling duties and following protocols that perhaps I have forgotten the difference between wanting something and simply accepting that it is necessary. The admission surprised him as much as it seemed to surprise her. For a moment, Ariane's elegant mask slipped completely, revealing something unexpectedly vulnerable beneath. That is the most honest answer a man has given me in years. And that surprises you? Completely. She smiled, and this time there were no games, no strategies, only genuine appreciation. Most men prefer comfortable lies to complicated truths. Perhaps I am not like most men. No. Ariane studied him for a long moment, as though reassessing her opinion of him entirely. You are most definitely not. They remained there under the shadow of the pavilion, surrounded by the fragrance of roses and the distant song of birds. For the first time since they had met, the tension between them shifted in quality. It was still there, but now it was different. Less antagonistic, more intriguing. Lady Selene. Thane broke the silence, his voice softer than he intended. May I ask you an equally direct question? Of course. Why did you accept this marriage? The truth, not the diplomatic response about alliances and family duty. Ariane observed him for a long moment, and he could see the inner battle flicker in her eyes, the struggle between self-preservation and honesty. At last she exhaled softly, because I preferred to choose my prison rather than let others choose it for me. She paused, then added with a smile that did not reach her eyes, and because something told me that a man capable of building walls so high around himself might understand the necessity of having someone equally fortified at his side. The answer struck him like a revelation. This woman was not only intelligent and beautiful, she was strategic in a way he recognized and respected. And more importantly, she had chosen him for the very same reasons he might choose her. Not for love or passion, but for a mutual understanding that both were survivors. Equality, then. He repeated her words from the night before. That is what you seek. Equality, Your Grace. Ariane lifted her chin with that elegant determination he was beginning to recognize as her trademark. It is something I intend to claim, with or without your cooperation. And there it was again, that subtle challenge, delivered with a smile that promised the days ahead would be anything but dull. As they walked back toward the castle, Thane found himself watching her from the corner of his eye, noticing details he had missed before. The alabaster skin that seemed to glow faintly in the filtered morning light, the golden strands escaping her coiffure and dancing in the breeze. A subtle, fresh fragrance clung to her, not the heavy jasmine of the night before, but something more natural, like rose petals mingled with morning dew. Thane swallowed hard, unsettled by the sensation blooming in his chest. How her eyes lit up genuinely at the sight of a butterfly perched on a rose. How she unconsciously adjusted her skirts so as not to crush the smaller flowers along the path. Ariane Selene was, he was beginning to realize, a woman of fascinating contrasts, strong yet gentle, calculating yet warm, defiant yet elegant. And for the first time in 3 years, Thane found himself genuinely curious to unravel all the mysteries she so clearly kept hidden. The days that followed the meeting in the garden passed in a succession of frantic preparations for the wedding. The castle buzzed with activity, seamstresses adjusting gowns, florists decorating halls, cooks preparing banquets. Amid all the commotion, Thane and Ariane exchanged only formal greetings and glances heavy with unspoken meanings. The chapel of Grayfen had never looked so majestic. White roses and green foliage adorned each marble pillar, and the light filtering through the ancient stained glass windows cast a mosaic of colors over the altar. The pews were filled with Avarus nobles and Amaranth dignitaries, all dressed in their finest, whispering speculations about the union that would seal the alliance between the two realms. Lady Honora Greymantle, a sharp-eyed woman of middle age whose smile never reached her eyes, occupied a place of prominence in the first row. Her burgundy silk gown and elaborate jewels proclaimed her rank in the hierarchy of the court, just as much as the way she observed Ariane's every movement with calculated attention. A bride far too young for a man with such experience, she murmured to Lord Casimir Falk, who leaned close enough to catch her venomous words. I do hope she is prepared for the realities of marriage to someone as complex as our Duke. Lord Casimir, a thin man with a well-trimmed mustache and fingers heavy with signet rings, nodded with an air of superiority. The ladies of Amaranth are known for their simplicity. Perhaps that is precisely what he needs, he said, though something in his tone suggested otherwise. Although I wonder if she truly comprehends what she is walking into. Their words were drowned out by the sound of the organ announcing the bride's arrival. Ariane appeared at the threshold of the chapel, like a vision of ethereal elegance. Her ivory satin gown flowed around her like liquid silk, embroidered with silver threads that caught the light and scattered it in thousands of tiny glimmers. The ancestral lace veil, once worn by queens of Amaranth, framed her face with almost divine delicacy. But when her eyes met Thane's, the air itself seemed to thicken inside the chapel. He waited at the altar, magnificent in his formal black attire trimmed with silver. But there was something in his posture, an almost imperceptible tension in his shoulders, a rigid line in his jaw that betrayed his inner struggle. As she began her measured walk toward him, he felt as if the world had narrowed to contain only the two of them. Ariane advanced with controlled grace. Yet Thane noticed the faint tension in her gloved hands, the nearly imperceptible way she bit her lower lip. Beneath the mask of serenity, she was nervous. The realization surprised him and strangely reassured him. She was not as unshakable as she seemed. When she finally reached his side, Thane offered his arm in what he intended to be a purely ceremonial gesture. But when her fingers brushed his forearm, a jolt of electricity shot through his body. From her slightly widened eyes, he suspected she had felt it too. The ceremony blurred into Latin words and ancient rituals. Thane spoke the responses at the proper moments, slipped the ring onto Ariane's finger with hands that tried not to tremble, yet his mind was entirely focused on the woman beside him, on the subtle fragrance rising from her warmed skin, on the way her golden lashes cast delicate shadows across her blushing cheeks, on the way she spoke her vows with a clear voice, faintly husky with emotion. When the priest declared them husband and wife, the moment of the kiss arrived with the inevitability of something both feared and longed for. Thane leaned toward her, his hands gently cupping her face. For an instant that felt eternal. They remained suspended there, breaths mingling, eyes locked in an intimacy that made the rest of the chapel vanish. When their lips finally touched, it was as though lightning split them both in two. The kiss was chaste, appropriate for the sacred setting, yet the intensity behind it was anything but innocent. Thane felt Ariane shudder against him, and it took every ounce of his will not to deepen the contact. When they parted, Ariane's eyes were slightly dazed, her lips parted, and Thane knew his own expression could not have been much different. Around them the chapel erupted in applause, but for the two of them, the world was still only that fragile bubble of tension and discovery. The reception that followed was an elaborate display of politics and diplomacy. Thane and Ariane moved among the guests, receiving congratulations and well wishes that ranged from warmly genuine to coldly calculated. Lady Honora was particularly effusive in her compliments of Ariane's beauty, but there was a sharpness to her admiration that put Thane instantly on guard. "What a stunning gown, my dear," Honora said, approaching Ariane with a smile that never reached her eyes. "I do hope you're feeling welcomed in Avaris. It is quite an adjustment to leave everything you have ever known behind." "Thank you, Lady Honora," Ariane replied with flawless grace. "I am discovering that Avaris has its own unique charms." "Oh, certainly. Though some of our customs may seem rigid to one accustomed to the spontaneity of Amaranth." Honora's tone was honey over blades. "I am certain the Duke will guide you properly in understanding our expectations." Thane felt Ariane stiffen almost imperceptibly at his side. "On the contrary, Lady Honora," he interjected, his voice laced with icy authority. "I am certain my wife will bring her own valuable perspectives to our traditions. Change, when welcomed, can be very refreshing." The look he exchanged with Honora was heavy with meaning, a subtle but unmistakable warning. She smiled and inclined her head, though her eyes gleamed with something that promised battles yet to come. When the night at last came to an end and the final guests departed, Thane escorted Ariane through the silent corridors of the castle to the chambers they would now share. The weight of what was about to happen hung between them like a storm cloud. The ducal chambers had been prepared with meticulous care. Rose petals were scattered across the canopy bed. Perfumed candles bathed the room in a soft glow, and a bottle of wine rested on a side table beside fruits and delicate confections. Ariane stopped in the center of the chamber, her hands clasped before her body. And for the first time since he had met her, Thane saw her truly uncertain. "It is a beautiful room," she said, her voice pitched slightly higher than usual. "It was my first wife's chamber." The words escaped Thane before he could stop them, brutally honest. "I had it completely redecorated." Ariane turned to look at him, surprised by the frank admission. "She was very different from me." Thane studied her face in the golden light of the candles, observing the genuine vulnerability she was allowing him to see. "In every imaginable way," he answered softly. "She was quiet, sweet, obedient." He paused, then added, "Utterly predictable." "And is that what you prefer?" The question lingered between them, weighted with implication. Thane moved toward her slowly, stopping only when he was close enough to see the flecks of gold within her blue eyes. "I thought I did." His voice was low, almost a whisper. "But you have made me question much of what I believed I preferred." Ariane swallowed visibly, her breath growing faintly shallow. "Thane." She so rarely used his name without the title, and hearing it on her lips sent a shiver down his spine. "I do not know how to be the wife of a man who still loves a woman long dead." The brutal honesty of her words struck him like a physical blow. For a moment, he was left without reply, confronted with a truth he had tried to bury. "I do not know if I still love her," he admitted at last, "or if what I feel is guilt disguised as love. She died because I could not protect her, and since then He stopped, running a hand through his hair. "I do not know how to allow anyone close enough to face the same risk." Ariane reached out, her hand resting gently upon his arm. "Then do not." "Not yet," her voice was soft but firm. "I do not need desperate love, Thane, but I do need honesty. I need to know that when you are ready to truly see, it will be me you see, not the ghost of whom I could never replace." Thane looked at her with something that came close to admiration. "How can you be so understanding?" Ariane smiled, small but genuine. "Because I have my own ghosts. I fear giving too much, too quickly, to someone who may not yet be ready to receive what I have to offer." The admission created an intimacy between them more powerful than any physical passion could have been. "What then are we to do?" he asked. "We wait. We learn, we let this grow in its own time." She paused, then added with a trace of her defiant humor, "And perhaps discover whether we are as compatible beyond the garden as we appeared within it." Thane laughed softly, the tension in his shoulders easing. "Are you suggesting we sleep in separate chambers?" "I am suggesting we sleep in this magnificent bed, as husband and wife, but leave certain intimacies until we are both truly ready for them." Her eyes gleamed with gentle mischief. "Unless, of course, the mighty Duke of Grayfen lacks the self-control to resist the charms of a simple lady of Amaranth." The challenge was offered lightly, yet Thane recognized the test beneath it. She was granting him an honorable escape, while at once daring him to prove he was the man of honor she hoped him to be. "Lady Whitlock," he said, using her new title for the first time, "you have just challenged a man who has spent the last 3 years practicing self-control. Prepare to be disappointed by my chivalry." Ariane laughed, the sound like silver bells filling the chamber. "In that case, Your Grace, prepare yourself to discover that a lady of Amaranth can be equally disciplined when the situation demands." They readied themselves for bed with a formality that bordered on ritual, each respecting the other's privacy as they changed. When at last they lay down, she in her ivory silk nightdress, he in his sleeping clothes, there remained a respectful yet conscious distance between them in the vast bed. "Ariane," Thane broke the silence of the dark. "Yes, thank you. For understanding. For not demanding something I cannot yet give." She turned to look at him, her profile traced by the faint light seeping through the curtains. "And thank you for your honesty, for not pretending to feel what you do not." They remained like that for a long moment, studying each other in the half-light, both acutely aware of the current that still existed between them, despite their decision to wait. "May I say something?" murmured Ariane. "Anything. You are far more honorable than I imagined when first we met." She paused, then added with a smile he could hear in her voice, "You are full of surprises." Duke Thane Whitlock. And as sleep finally claimed them, Thane found himself thinking that perhaps, for the first time in years, he was eager to discover what other surprises lay ahead. Dawn arrived with a strange dance of avoidance and curiosity. Ariane awoke alone in the wide bed, the masculine scent of Thane still clinging to the pillows beside her, evidence that he had indeed returned in the night and slept respectfully distant, but present. When she descended for the morning meal, she found him already dressed and speaking with Agnes Fairweather, the loyal maid assigned to her service. The look he cast her was different from the day before. There was something new there, a calculated intensity that made her pulse quicken against her will. "Good morning, my wife," he said, his voice laden with unspoken meanings. "Good morning, my husband," she replied, testing the words upon her own lips. The moment was interrupted by the arrival of Lady Honora, who swept into the breakfast hall with the punctuality of a vulture scenting carrion. "What a delightful morning for the newlyweds," she declared, her smile sharp as shattered crystal. "I trust you both rested well." There was venom in the cordiality, a probing for weakness or tension between them. Ariane felt Thane stiffen almost imperceptibly at her side. "We rested perfectly, Lady Honora," Ariane replied with icy grace. "Grafin Castle offers a welcome that is surprisingly warm." The double meaning did not go unnoticed. Thane stifled a smile, recognizing his wife's skill at delivering barbed courtesies in return. "How wonderful," Honora replied, her eyes narrowing. "I presume you will both attend the traditional hunt today?" "Lord Casimir has arranged a special expedition in honor of the ducal wedding." It was a social snare. To refuse would be seen as weakness. To accept would expose Ariane to the shifting dangers of the court on the move. "Of course," Thane said, his voice ringing with authority. "My wife is an excellent horsewoman." Ariane glanced at him in surprise. They had never discussed her riding abilities, yet something in his tone suggested absolute confidence in them. 2 hours later, the hunting party gathered in the castle's main courtyard. Ariane appeared dressed in a deep blue riding habit that accentuated her elegant figure, and Thane felt something tighten in his chest at the sight of her. She was both dazzling and dangerous, like a blade forged in silk. Lord Casimir approached with a smile that never reached his calculating eyes. "Lady Whitlock, what a pleasure to have you join our little expedition. I do hope the ladies of Amaranth are resilient when it comes to more vigorous pursuits." The ladies of Amaranth, Lord Casimir, are raised to face whatever challenge life presents, Ariane answered, mounting her mare with fluid ease that betrayed years of experience, be it political, social, or physical. From his own mount, Thane watched the exchange, noting how she transformed every provocation into a demonstration of strength. There was a warrior's elegance about her that stirred within him a dangerous admiration. The hunt began without incident, lords and ladies riding through the ancient woods surrounding Grayfen. But Thane was no fool. He knew well enough that the true prey was not the boar they pursued, but the new duchess riding among them. The moment of reckoning came as they crossed a stream, spanned by a narrow stone bridge. Lady Honora's horse, apparently startled by something in the water, reared violently, threatening to throw its rider onto the jagged rocks below. While others hesitated, frozen by surprise, Ariane acted. With reflexes that seemed instinctive, she spurred her mare forward, closing in on the panicked animal. In a movement that revealed years of equestrian training, she seized the reins of Honora's horse and steadied it, bringing the beast back under control upon the bridge. The silence that followed was absolute. Lady Honora, shaken but striving for composure, turned to Ariane with an expression impossible to decipher. "I thank you, Lady Whitlock. That was, unexpected." "Merely instinct, Lady Honora," Ariane replied, her breath slightly quickened but her voice perfectly steady. "When one grows up upon the open fields of Amaranth, one learns to react swiftly." Thane observed the scene with something close to fascination. There was not only courage in Ariane's action, but a natural mastery that had turned what might have been a tragedy into a display of prowess. Lord Casimir, who had remained conspicuously distant throughout the incident, finally approached with a forced smile. "Remarkable reflexes, Lady Whitlock. Clearly the tales of the sturdiness of Amaranth women are not exaggerated." There was something in his tone that suggested sturdiness was not intended as a compliment for a lady. "I prefer to think of it as proper preparation for life, Lord Casimir," Ariane countered. "After all, one never knows when someone might require unexpected assistance." The look she gave him was serene, but there was steel beneath the silk. Casimir withdrew slightly, recognizing that he had underestimated his opponent. As the group resumed its path, Thane rode up beside Ariane, silent for several moments before speaking. "Where did you learn to ride like that?" he asked at last. "My father believed a daughter should be as capable as a son," she answered, glancing at him sideways. "He used to say that life rarely warns before it presents its challenges. A wise man. He was." A shadow of sadness flickered in her eyes. "He would have liked you." The remark caught him off guard. There was a casual intimacy in her statement that hinted she had been considering him in contexts beyond their immediate reality. "Why do you say that?" "Because he respected men who chose to do what was right, rather than merely what was expected." The reference to the previous night hovered between them, unspoken yet understood. Thane felt something shift within his chest, a mixture of pride and something far more perilous, something he dared not name. "Ariane," he began, but was interrupted by the arrival of one of the scouts. "Your Grace, the boar has been sighted. The hunt may proceed." The rest of the morning passed in a succession of pursuits and maneuvers, yet Thane found his attention straying from the prey to his wife, observing how she moved with natural grace among the riders, how she answered every veiled barb with cutting elegance, how she turned every attempt to belittle her into a display of her own superiority. When they returned to the castle at midday, Lady Honora and Lord Casimir withdrew quickly, clearly frustrated by the failure of their unspoken schemes. Thane escorted Ariane to the stables, where she dismounted with the same fluid grace that characterized her every movement. "It was an interesting morning," he remarked, offering his hand to help her down. The touch of their fingers sent that familiar current racing through them both, but this time neither withdrew immediately. "Interesting is a delicate word for what transpired today," she replied, not releasing his hand. "They were testing me, and you passed with distinction." Ariane smiled, a genuine smile that made something inside him warm dangerously. "It is not finished, you know. People like Lady Honora and Lord Casimir do not surrender easily when they meet resistance." "No," he agreed, finally releasing her hand, but remaining close enough to feel the warmth of her skin. "But now they know they underestimated their opponent. And that may be the most valuable advantage you could possess." "Our opponent," she corrected softly. "We are partners in this dance, are we not?" The word partners echoed between them with implications far beyond courtly politics. For the first time, Thane allowed himself to consider the possibility that their arranged marriage might become something more than a convenient alliance. "Yes," he said, his voice lower than intended. "Partners." As they walked back toward the castle, Thane found himself watching the sway of her skirts. The way the sunlight caught golden glints in her hair, the elegant profile of her face when she turned to comment on the gardens. For the first time in 3 years, he was genuinely curious not only about a woman, but about his wife. And for the first time since he had resolved to court her properly, he began to suspect that the hunt might prove more dangerous for the hunter than he had ever imagined, especially when the prey revealed itself to be as fascinating as it was elusive. A week had passed since the hunt, and Grayfen Castle was beginning to adjust to the new reality of having a duchess active within its halls. Ariane had established a careful routine: mornings in the gardens, afternoons overseeing domestic affairs, evenings in diplomatic conversations with members of the court. Thane observed everything from a respectful, yet increasingly interested distance. Each day revealed new facets of his wife: her ability to memorize the names of servants, her diplomatic manner of settling minor disputes, the way she managed to extract valuable information through seemingly casual conversations. It was a delicate dance between them. He courted her with subtle gestures, flowers left at her breakfast place, rare books on botany placed upon her desk, invitations to afternoon walks through the gardens. She responded with equal subtlety, smiles that lingered a second too long, remarks that revealed she had noticed his efforts, a warmer inflection each time she spoke his name. But beneath this civilized courtesy, something far more intense simmered. On the 7th day, Thane was summoned to the private chambers of King Balthor. He found the monarch bent over correspondence, but his expression brightened at the sight of the Duke. "Thane, how fares married life after a full week?" "Revealing, your majesty, my wife is more complex than I anticipated." Balthor poured 2 glasses of wine, smiling. "Complex, an interesting word. And she is settling well into court life, better than many expected. She has shown remarkable capacity for political navigation." "Ah, yes. I have heard comments. Some favorable, some concerned." The king's eyes gleamed with hidden meaning. "I imagine certain people are reassessing certain expectations they once held." Thane knew Balthor well enough to recognize the deeper layers in his words. "What expectations, your majesty?" Balthor walked to the window, gazing out at the gardens where Ariane could be seen speaking with Agnes Fairweather. "You know, when I chose Ariane for you, it was not only for the commercial alliances. There were others who saw your withdrawal after Isabel as an opportunity to assume greater influence over the kingdom's affairs." Thane stiffened slightly. "Lord Casimir, Lady Honora, others. They wagered that your solitude would make you dependent upon them." Balthor paused meaningfully. "But I saw a man who needed a reason to fight again, a partner who would strengthen him. And if they attempt to destabilize our position," the king's smile was predatory, "then they will discover they underestimated not only the Duke, but his Duchess. I have watched Ariane this week, Thane. She does not merely charm, she maps. She identifies alliances, evaluates loyalties. That woman understands power." The revelation startled Thane. He had noticed her diplomacy, but had not fully grasped the strategic depth behind it. "She is building our defense. She is building your joint empire. And that is precisely why I chose her." Balthor emptied his glass. "There is a ball tomorrow night. I suggest you use the occasion to publicly consolidate your union." Meanwhile, in chambers not far away, Lady Honora paced nervously while Lord Casimir watched from the window. "A week," Honora muttered. "A single week and she already has half the lesser counselors eating out of her hand." "Worse than that," Casimir replied. "She has them talking. About loyalties, about policies, about who supports whom. The woman is a natural spy." "The original plan was working perfectly," Honora snapped, halting mid-step. Thane isolated, gradually losing relevance. "A few more months and we would have convinced Balthor he required more active counselors. And now?" Honora smiled with calculated cruelty. "Now we must employ a different strategy. If we cannot isolate him through solitude, perhaps we can do so through conjugal issues." "What sort of issues?" "Young women, especially ambitious ones, sometimes develop appetites a husband still chained to the past cannot satisfy. And when that happens," Casimir understood at once, rumors of infidelity would destroy not only the king's trust in him, but his in her. "Precisely. And betrayed men rarely make wise political decisions." The following night transformed Greyfen's great hall into a spectacle of elegance. Nobles from across the realm had gathered for this ball in honor of the new Duchess, creating the perfect stage for demonstrations of power and politics. Ariane appeared at the top of the grand staircase like a vision in sapphire velvet, the gown flowing around her body like midnight water. The Whitlock family jewels sparkled at her neck and ears, a visual declaration of her new station. But it was when her eyes met Thane's across the hall that the true magic occurred. He awaited her magnificent in formal black attire, but there was something different in his bearing, an intensity, as though some important decision had already been made. As she descended the stairs, he approached with deliberate steps, offering his arm with a formality that masked something far more primal. "My lady," he said, and there was a new warmth in his voice. "My lord," she answered, accepting his escort with grace that concealed her own growing nervousness. The first dance was a traditional minuet, formal and proper for public observation. But when the second piece began, a more intimate waltz. Something shifted between them. Thane drew her into his arms with newfound confidence, his hand at her waist firmer, more possessive. As they moved across the floor, every step seemed charged with unspoken meaning. "You have danced with half the court tonight," he remarked as he spun her elegantly. "Diplomacy, my lord, as you have taught me by example. And what did you discover in your diplomatic investigations?" Ariane smiled, but there was steel beneath the silk. "That some members of this court are very eager to know whether our union is genuine or merely political." Thane pulled her fractionally closer, subtly breaking the rules of social propriety. The gesture did not go unnoticed by their audience. "And what did you tell them?" "That some questions are far too impertinent to deserve answers." She paused, her gaze locking with his. "But perhaps it is time we offered a clearer response." "And what are you suggesting?" Instead of replying in words, she allowed him to guide her through a series of more intimate turns, ending pressed against his chest, their faces dangerously close. The entire hall seemed to hold its breath. "I am suggesting that perhaps our week of polite courtesy has served its purpose," she murmured, for his ears alone. When the music ended, Thane did not release her immediately. Instead, he bent and kissed her hand with an intensity that transformed the courtly gesture into something almost intimate. A ripple of approval murmured through the crowd. In the shadows, Lady Honora and Lord Casimir watched with mounting unease. Their schemes had just become far more urgent. Hours later, after the last guest had departed, Thane sought fresh air in the gardens. He found Ariane standing beside the marble fountain, still clad in the magnificent sapphire velvet, her jewels catching the moonlight like fallen stars. She gazed pensively at the crystalline water, her fingers absently tracing the stone rim. "A night like this deserves to be savored," he said, approaching with quiet steps across the grass. Ariane started slightly, turning with a hand pressed to her chest. "Thane, you frightened me. Forgive me." He smiled, stopping close enough for her to feel his presence, though not so close as to be improper. "I could not sleep after all that. Social performance. Performance? The dance. The glances. That entire carefully orchestrated theater to show the court we are a united couple." Ariane tilted her head, studying his expression in the silver light. "Was it theater?" Thane stepped closer, his voice dropping to a more intimate register. "Some parts were very real, Lady Whitlock. Dangerously real." The formal title spoken in that husky voice sent a shiver down her spine. There was something different in his stance, predatory and elegant all at once. "Dangerous how?" Instead of answering at once, he lifted a hand and gently brushed a stray golden curl that had slipped free from her elaborate coiffure, winding it softly around his finger. "Dangerous because they make me forget we are strangers bound by convenience." His eyes held hers with an intensity that made her heart race. "Dangerous because when I held you in my arms tonight, for a moment I forgot it was only for show." Ariane swallowed, heat flooding her body. "Thane, you trembled when I touched your waist," he continued, his voice low and hypnotic. "I felt it through the silk of your gown. And when our eyes met during that waltz," he stepped closer, now so near she could feel the warmth radiating from him. Breathe in the masculine scent that always surrounded him. "What did you see in my eyes?" she asked, her own voice rougher than she intended. "Something that should not have been there. Something that makes me question everything I thought I knew about arranged marriages and political convenience." Thane raised his free hand, his fingers brushing lightly along the line of her jaw. The touch was so delicate she might have doubted it happened, had the current coursing through her body not been undeniable. "Ariane," he murmured, her name caressing his lips. "You are playing with fire. Me?" She barely managed the whisper. "I am doing nothing. You are." His gaze lingered on her lips for an eternity. "You are making me crave things I swore never to crave again. Making me forget why I built these walls around my heart." Ariane's heart pounded. There was something hypnotic in the way he spoke, in the intensity of his eyes, in the nearness that made every nerve in her body hum with awareness. "And that is dangerous?" she managed to ask. Thane leaned in closer, his lips almost brushing her ear as he whispered, "Very dangerous. Because once these walls fall, my dear wife, there will be no turning back. And you, his fingers traced the curve of her cheek with exquisite care. You may not be prepared for the man you will find on the other side. The whisper sent shockwaves through her body. Ariane found herself struggling to breathe evenly, every fiber of her being acutely aware of his nearness, of the heat radiating from his skin, of the dangerous promise in his voice. How can I know if I am prepared? The words slipped out before she could stop them. Thane smiled then, not the courteous smile she had grown accustomed to, but something darker, more primal. Perhaps, he said, his thumb brushing lightly over the curve of her lips, when I return. It will be time to find out. For a suspended moment that seemed to defy time itself. They remained like that, breaths mingling, bodies separated by only a few charged inches. Ariane could feel the battle waging in her own eyes, the struggle between the sensible woman who knew she should step back and the woman who longed to lean closer, to discover just how far this seduction might go. Then, instead of retreating, Thane made a decision that surprised them both. His hands came up to cradle her face with a tenderness that contrasted starkly with the burning intensity in his gaze. For an infinite heartbeat, he simply looked at her, memorizing every detail, every shadow the moonlight etched upon her features. Ariane, he murmured, her name a prayer on his lips, and then his mouth met hers. The kiss was soft at first, almost reverent, as though he were savoring something precious that might shatter if handled in haste. But when she sighed against him, a low, unbidden sound that sent fire racing through his veins, something inside him broke apart. The kiss deepened, grew more urgent. Ariane felt her knees weaken as he drew her closer, one hand sliding to her waist, while the other tangled in her golden hair. She had never been kissed like this, with a passion that seemed to consume the very air around them. That made her heart pound so fiercely she was certain he could feel it against his chest. When they finally parted, both were breathless. Thane rested his forehead against hers, eyes closed, as though trying to brand the moment into memory. God, he whispered, his voice hoarse with restrained desire. You have no idea what you do to me. Ariane trembled under his hands, still reeling from the sheer intensity of what had just passed between them. Her lips tingled, her entire body vibrated with awareness of him. Thane, she began, but her voice broke. He lifted his eyes to meet hers, and what he saw nearly shattered his resolve. There was desire, confusion, vulnerability, and something deeper he dared not name. With supernatural effort, he stepped back, his hands reluctantly leaving her. I must leave now, he said, his voice betraying the cost of his withdrawal. Tonight you will sleep alone, my dear wife. But know this, he paused, his dark eyes locked onto hers. I will think of you with every mile I ride. Of your eyes, of how you feel in my arms, of everything I left unfinished. The words fell between them like burning promises. Ariane felt her cheeks flush, her heart beating so violently she was sure he could hear it. Thane, she began, but had no idea how to end it. Until my return, Ariane, he murmured, taking her hand and raising it to his lips for a kiss that lingered a heartbeat longer than propriety allowed. Count the days, as I shall, and with that he turned and walked away. He walked away, leaving her standing in the moonlit garden, her skin still tingling where he had touched her, and the undeniable certainty that sleep would be the last thing she could manage that night. As his silhouette disappeared into the shadows, a single question echoed through her thoughts. What man would she truly find when those walls finally crumbled? And why, God help her, was she so desperately curious to discover it? 3 days had passed since Thane's departure, and Grafin Castle felt strangely empty without his commanding presence. Ariane tried to keep herself occupied with ducal duties, but often caught herself absently touching her lips, remembering the kiss that had changed everything, in Lady Honora's private chambers. However, a very different meeting was underway. 3 days, Honora murmured, pacing the room. 3 days, and she walks the corridors like a woman in love. Did you see how she smiles when she thinks no one is watching? Lord Casimir stood at the window, his fingers drumming impatiently on the sill. Time is on our side. Thane will not return for at least 4 more days. Enough time to plant the necessary seeds. And Sir Edmund? Has he agreed? Casimir's smile was cruelly calculated. Sir Edmund Ravencrest has considerable gambling debts. Debts I am willing to forgive in exchange for cooperation. He is young, handsome, and, more importantly, desperate enough to follow instructions. And if she resists, if she suspects, that is why we must be subtle. A drink during afternoon tea, something to relax her. Nothing harmful merely. Enough to make her more pliant, more trusting. Honora stopped before the mirror, adjusting her hair with military precision. The plan is simple. I invite her to a private social call in my chambers. During our conversation, I offer wine with a small addition. Once she is sufficiently relaxed, Sir Edmund will appear with some plausible excuse. And then we need only let nature take its course. A young wife alone, an attractive man, lowered inhibitions. Honora smiled like a serpent. They need not actually do anything improper. Merely be discovered in questionable circumstances. Casimir nodded in grim approval. And who will find them? I naturally, accompanied by a few of the court's most loose-tongued ladies. Witnesses are essential for this kind of discovery. The following day, Ariane received an elegantly written invitation from Lady Honora for a private tea. The message spoke of delicate feminine matters requiring discretion and suggested that Honora's chambers would provide the necessary privacy for such a conversation. Ariane hesitated. Something about Lady Honora always unsettled her, but refusing could be seen as discourteous, and she admitted to herself she felt lonely with Thane away. Agnes Fairweather, who had become her confidant, frowned upon hearing about the invitation. My lady, if I may, Lady Honora is not known for her charitable social graces. Why the sudden interest in your company? Perhaps she is trying to build bridges, Ariane replied, though her own voice sounded uncertain. As the Duke's wife, I must cultivate relationships with all the ladies of the court. Agnes did not look convinced, but inclined her head respectfully. As you wish, my lady, but perhaps I should accompany you? That will not be necessary, Agnes. It is only a tea between ladies. By late afternoon, Ariane made her way to Lady Honora's lavish chambers. The setting was prepared with excessive elegance. Fresh flowers, fine porcelain, a selection of cakes and delicate sweets. Honora greeted her with unusual effusiveness. My dear Ariane, how wonderful to have this opportunity to speak privately. Do sit, please. I have prepared your tea exactly as I was told you prefer. The conversation began innocently enough. Comments about court life, questions about her adjustment to the castle. Yet there was something strained in Honora's cordiality that kept Ariane faintly on guard. It must be challenging to have a husband so often away on missions, Honora remarked casually, pouring more wine instead of tea. Men like the Duke are so dedicated to duty that they sometimes forget the more delicate needs of their wives. Ariane felt a blush rise to her cheeks, remembering the searing kiss in the garden. Thane is very attentive when he is present. Oh, I am sure. But still, a young woman left alone for days. Honora let the thought linger, smiling conspiratorially. Perhaps a little more wine? This one is especially fine, imported directly from the royal vineyards. Ariane sipped obediently, noting a slightly bitter taste she attributed to spices. The conversation continued, but she began to feel strangely relaxed, almost drowsy. Her words seemed to float before leaving her mouth. Are you feeling well, my dear? Honora asked with feigned concern. You look a little tired. Yes, a little. Perhaps I should... At that moment, the door opened and Sir Edmund Ravencrest entered, appearing flustered. Lady Honora, forgive the intrusion, but I must... He stopped, feigning surprise at the sight of Ariane. Oh, Lady Whitlock, I did not know you were here. Sir Edmund. Honora rose gracefully. What a coincidence. I was just speaking with Lady Ariane about, well, matters that perhaps a young man such as yourself could clarify better. Ariane tried to rise, but her legs felt unsteady. The world blurred slightly, her inhibitions curiously dulled. I should go, she murmured, her own voice sounding distant. Nonsense, Honora exclaimed. Sir Edmund, be so kind as to help Lady Ariane to my private chambers. She needs a little rest. This heat can be overwhelming for someone unaccustomed to Avarice's climate. Following the rehearsed script, Edmund offered his arm with apparent gallantry. Ariane, struggling against the creeping drowsiness, accepted. Honora's inner chambers were opulent, dominated by a vast bed draped in vibrant silks. Edmund guided her to sit at the edge, his hands lingering a fraction too long at her waist. "Perhaps you should rest here for a few hours," he suggested, his voice oddly husky, "until you feel better." Ariane nodded vaguely, her mind swimming sluggishly. Something was wrong, but her thoughts moved as though through honey. "Just for a moment," she managed. Edmund stepped back as she lay down but remained in the room. In the outer chamber, Lady Honora counted the minutes, awaiting the perfect moment to execute the final stage of her plan. When Ariane finally succumbed to the drug-laced wine, Edmund approached the bed. Following Honora's precise instructions, he discreetly removed several pieces of his own attire, scattering them strategically across the chamber. With calculated care, he adjusted Ariane's gown just enough to suggest it had been disturbed. Satisfied with the tableau, he positioned himself near the window, awaiting Honora's signal. Outside, Lady Honora prepared for the coup de grace. She had discreetly summoned 3 of the court's most notorious gossips for a surprise visit to check on the young Duchess's well-being. "Lady Margaret, Lady Catherine, how kind of you to worry about our dear Ariane," Honora said theatrically. "She was not feeling well during our conversation. Perhaps we should see how she fares." Her heart raced with malicious delight as she led them toward her private chambers. Inside, Ariane slept deeply, unaware of the danger circling ever closer. Her blue gown was slightly rumpled, her hair fanned across the pillow in artful disarray. Sir Edmund, his torso partly bare, stood positioned to suggest propriety. Lady Honora placed her hand on the doorknob, her triumphant smile hidden from her companions. "Let us see how our dear Duchess is." "Recovering," she murmured. The door creaked open slowly, revealing the carefully staged scene within. Behind Honora, Lady Margaret and Lady Catherine leaned forward, their faces shifting from concern to scandalized shock. And there lay Ariane, sleeping innocently, unaware that her reputation and her marriage were about to be torn apart by the vision the court ladies would carry from this room. The door swung wider, the young Duchess's fate hanging by a thread, as the distant echo of consequences yet to come whispered like a sinister omen through Grafen's silent halls. The sound of galloping hooves echoed across Grafen's courtyard 3 days earlier than expected. The mission in the northern provinces had been resolved with surprising efficiency. The corrupt collectors had surrendered at the mere presence of the Duke, and the agreements were sealed in hours, not days. Thane dismounted in haste, eager to find Ariane. The 3 days away from her had been a sweet torture, his mind constantly returning to that kiss in the garden, to whispered promises, to the desire that had grown with every mile traveled. He went directly to the ducal chambers, only to find them empty. Frowning, he sought out Agnes Fairweather. "Agnes, where is my wife?" The loyal maid looked startled to see him. "Your Grace, we did not expect you so soon. The Duchess she is with Lady Honora Greymantle. They went to her private chambers some hours ago." A pang of suspicion flared in Thane's chest. Honora was not known for seeking genuine female companionship, least of all Ariane's. "How long?" "Since mid-afternoon, Your Grace. They said it was for a private conversation between ladies." Thane's sharpened instincts screamed a warning. Something was wrong. He strode quickly to the wing where Honora's chambers were located, and what he found confirmed his darkest fears. A cluster of court ladies crowded the corridor, whispering scandalized words. Lady Margaret gesticulated dramatically, while Lady Catherine covered her mouth in theatrical shock. "The unbelievable. A duchess. With another man." Completely disheveled. He without a shirt. What a scandal. "The poor Duke." Thane approached like a storm, his very presence silencing the group. "What is happening here?" His voice cut through the air like a blade of ice. Lady Margaret paled. "Your Grace, that is, Lady Honora asked us to check on the Duchess's well-being, and when we entered..." Thane did not wait for her to finish. He shoved the door open and stormed inside. The sight before him made his blood boil. Ariane lay unconscious on the bed, her gown disarranged, hair strewn across the pillows. Sir Edmund Ravencrest stood near the window, coat and waistcoat discarded, his face marked by guilt and nerves. What in God's name is happening here? Thane roared, his voice filled with ducal authority and deadly menace. Edmund recoiled, clearly terrified. Your Grace, I can explain. Then explain. What did you do to my wife? Nothing. That is, she was unwell, and Lady Honora asked. Thane advanced, lethal fury radiating from him. Did you touch her? Edmund hesitated, and that hesitation was his ruin. Following Honora's script, he attempted to imply ambiguity. Nothing happened that the Duchess did not, that she would not have. Thane's fist crashed into Edmund's jaw with devastating force. The young man crumpled to the ground, stunned. We will settle accounts later, Thane said in a voice like death, flexing his bloodied knuckles. Now get out of my sight before I kill you. Edmund staggered out, followed by the gossiping ladies, dismissed with one glacial glance. Lady Honora tried to protest, but he silenced her with a single word. Later, with infinite care, Thane gathered Ariane into his arms. She was deeply unconscious, her breathing uneven. Her skin was warm, but there was something unnatural in her state. He carried her through the corridors to their chambers, ignoring the whispers that followed. Laying her gently on their shared bed, he summoned the court physician at once. 2 hours later, Ariane stirred with a pounding headache. Her eyes opened slowly, trying to focus in the golden dimness of the room. Thane? Her voice was hoarse, confused as if emerging from a nightmare. You came back? How? She tried to sit, but dizziness forced her down again. One hand pressed against her throbbing temple. That was when she noticed his expression. The hard mask, the cold eyes studying her as though she were a stranger. A shiver of fear ran through her spine. What were you doing in Lady Honora's chambers with Sir Edmund Ravencrest? The words struck Ariane like physical blows. Her heart raced, panic crashing through her body still heavy with lethargy. What? Her voice rose in desperation. What are you saying? I was not with any man. Each word from him felt like the floor vanishing beneath her feet. Thane's cold gaze, so different from the warmth she had left in that garden kiss, made her want to weep. I was answering Lady Honora's invitation, she explained quickly, fighting back tears that burned her eyes. We were speaking of court matters, but I began to feel unwell, so drowsy as if I could not keep my eyes open. She asked me to lie down. The memory began returning in hazy fragments, each one making her stomach twist. Actually, just then Sir Edmund came in and... Oh God. Her hand flew to her mouth, horror dawning in her eyes. Thane, I swear on all that is sacred, I did not. Thane watched every flicker of her expression, every tremor in her voice that mixed physical pain with emotional despair. Years of political experience had honed his ability to detect lies, but everything in Ariane screamed truth and genuine horror. Did you eat or drink anything? His voice softened slightly at the sight of her panic. Yes, I drank a single glass of wine. Only one. She swallowed with difficulty, her throat parched. It tasted odd, a little bitter, burned slightly going down, but I thought it was expensive spices. Lady Honora said it was imported especially. Thane's expression shifted, the icy mask giving way to controlled yet lethal fury. It was a trap, Ariane. They set you up, put you in a compromising position to insinuate you were having an affair. Heavens above. Ariane sat up abruptly, ignoring the wave of nausea that struck her. You cannot possibly believe this. I would never commit such a betrayal. The tears she had tried so hard to hold back finally spilled over, hot against her pale cheeks. Thane studied her closely, the genuine indignation that made her body tremble, the horrified shock that stole her breath, the way she met his gaze even through tears without once looking away. Everything confirmed her innocence. His expression softened, the hardness giving way to a mix of relief and protective fury. I know you wouldn't, but the court is in an uproar. Even under my threat, the whispers creep through the corridors like poison. More tears of frustration and shame shimmered in Ariane's eyes. She felt dirty, used, as if she had been violated in a way she couldn't even fully comprehend. Forgive me, she whispered, her voice breaking. Forgive me for being so foolish, so trusting. I should have suspected when she was suddenly so courteous with me. Lady Honora never showed genuine kindness before, but her voice faltered. I was feeling so lonely with you gone, and when she offered feminine company, I thought perhaps we could. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. Thane's heart constricted at the sight, vulnerable, wounded, blaming herself for trusting where she shouldn't. He sat on the edge of the bed, gently touching her tear-streaked face. You have nothing to apologize for. Kindness and trust are not weaknesses, Ariane. They are qualities that make you who you are. His voice was low, consoling. You need not worry. I have everything under control, and he did. While Ariane struggled with the lingering effects of the drug and the emotional trauma of what had happened, Thane set into motion an investigation that would reveal the full extent of the conspiracy. The first step was questioning the servants. Ducal loyalty outweighed any bribe, and soon it was uncovered that a young cupbearer had been instructed by Lady Honora to add special spices to the wine served to the Duchess. The boy, terrified when he realized he had taken part in a scheme against the ducal family, confessed everything. How Lady Honora had given him a small vial, how Sir Edmund waited in the outer chambers, how the ladies had been strategically positioned to discover the scandal. Further inquiries revealed Edmund's gambling debts and Lord Casimir's secret payments. Documents were found, witnesses questioned, and gradually the entire web of conspiracy was laid bare. But the most shocking revelation came when Ariane, determined to clear her name, began her own quiet investigation. Her experience mapping out court alliances during her first week of marriage now proved invaluable. She uncovered secret correspondence between Casimir and discontented lords from other provinces. Plans not only to undermine Thane's leadership, but to question the very authority of King Balthor himself. The trap laid for her was merely one piece in a much larger puzzle of treason. When they presented their findings to the king, Balthor showed no surprise, only a grim satisfaction. We have suspected for months, he admitted in private audience, but we needed proof. You have given us exactly what we required. The final confrontation took place in the Great Hall, with the entire court assembled. Lady Honora and Lord Casimir were brought before the throne, their faces pale as they realized their schemes had not only failed, but turned against them. Lady Honora Greymantle, the king's voice thundered through the hall. You are accused of conspiring against a duchess of the realm, of slander, of attempting to destroy a royal alliance through false accusations of adultery. Lord Casimir Falk, you are accused of conspiracy against the crown, of attempting to subvert ducal authority, and of treason against the realm. The evidence was presented methodically. The cupbearer testified, trembling. Sir Edmund, facing total ruin, confessed everything in exchange for clemency. The secret correspondence was read aloud. When it was over, Lady Honora and Lord Casimir were stripped of their titles and banished from the kingdom. Sir Edmund lost his lands and was condemned to years of military service at the most dangerous frontiers. As the conspirators were led away, Thane took Ariane's hand. Before the entire court, he kissed her with tenderness and pride. Let all know, he declared, his voice carrying through the hall, that Lady Ariane Whitlock, Duchess of Grayfen, is not only my wife, but my partner in all things. Those who seek to tarnish her honor or our union will discover they have gravely underestimated both the Duchess and her ducal protector. The hall erupted in applause. But Ariane saw only Thane. In the crucible of treachery and lies, their love had been tested and emerged stronger. The conspiracy had been unmasked. The truth had prevailed, and together, they had proven they were far more formidable as a team than any enemy had ever imagined. 3 days had passed since the public exposure of the conspiracy. Grayfen's court had fallen quiet, the malicious whispers replaced by renewed respect for the Duchess, who had endured the ordeal with unshakable dignity, and for the formidable partnership she and Thane displayed. But within the ducal chambers, a different tension lingered, not political uncertainty or suspicion, but something far more intimate and inevitable. Ariane stood before the open windows, watching the sunset bathe the gardens in golden hues. The emerald green silk gown she wore caught the soft light, casting an ethereal halo around her. Her hair, loose in waves down her back, shimmered like molten gold. Thane found her like this when he entered their chambers, and for a moment he simply watched. The woman before him had faced betrayal, slander, and conspiracy with a strength that astonished him daily. But more than that, she had chosen to remain by his side, to fight for them, to build something real from what had begun as mere convenience. "You look thoughtful," he said, approaching with quiet steps across the Persian rug. Ariane turned slowly, a soft smile touching her lips. "I was reflecting on these last few days, on how everything has changed." "Yes," he agreed, stopping close enough to breathe in the faint fragrance of jasmine that always clung to her. "It has." He fell silent for a moment, watching how the golden light of dusk wove fire into her hair. "Ariane, there is something I must tell you. Something I have kept to myself for weeks." His voice carried a tenderness she rarely heard. "Since you arrived at Grafen, since that first day in the garden when you challenged me with those curious eyes, something inside me began to stir." She studied him closely, recognizing the inner struggle reflected in his eyes. "For 3 years," he continued, stepping closer, "I have lived in a kind of perpetual winter, cold, gray, without color. I had grown accustomed to that solitude, convinced it was my destiny, that it was all I deserved after failing to protect Isabel." Thane lifted a hand, gently caressing her cheek. "But then you came, with your light, your strength, your refusal to accept my walls as permanent. And day after day, Ariane, I felt the ice around my heart begin to melt. First small fissures, then wider cracks until—" He paused, searching for the right words. "Until I realized I was no longer the same man who had buried his ability to love, along with his first wife. You did not just warm my heart, my dear. You taught me that I still had a heart capable of loving again." Tears shimmered in Ariane's eyes at the vulnerability in his voice. "I realized I am in love with you, Ariane. I love you with an intensity that both astonishes and completes me. I love you not because it was arranged by kings, but because I choose to. Because you are extraordinary, brave, intelligent, and because when I am with you, I become the man I always wanted to be." Ariane felt her heart might burst with happiness. She lifted her hands to his face, her fingers tracing the lines time and responsibility had carved there. "And I love you, Thane," she whispered. "I knew it from the first moment I saw you. I do not love you in spite of your journey, but because of it, because of the man you have become. Strong, honorable, able to rise from suffering itself to love again with a depth few ever know." She smiled through her tears. "You speak of ice around your heart, but do you know what I saw from the very first day? I saw a man protecting something precious, his ability to love truly. And when you finally chose to love me, I knew I was receiving something rare and sacred." They remained like that for a long moment, simply breathing the same air. Then Thane drew back slightly, his gaze locking on hers with an intensity that made every nerve ending in her body hum with awareness. "Ariane," he said, his voice carrying weight and promise, but also profound tenderness. "This time when I bring you to our bed, it will be to love you as you deserve. To show you with every touch, every kiss how much you mean to me." He lifted her hands, kissing each palm reverently. "You are precious to me, more precious than any treasure in the realm. And I want our first time to be perfect, a celebration of all we have built together." Ariane looked at him with eyes shining with emotion and trust. She raised her hand to his face, her thumb tracing the line of his jaw. "Then love me, Thane," she whispered, her voice laden with total surrender. "Love me as only you can. I trust you. Completely." The pure love in her voice, the absolute trust he saw in her eyes, sent waves of heat and deep devotion through his veins. With a fluid motion, he lifted her into his arms, his hands firm but infinitely gentle. "Then let me worship you as the goddess you are to me," he murmured against her lips. What followed was a symphony of mutual discovery, reverent caresses and whispered words of love. Thane treated her as the most fragile and precious thing in the world, every touch infused with adoration, every kiss a silent vow of protection and eternal devotion. And when at last they rested in each other's arms, Thane knew he had found not only a wife but a soulmate, someone who complimented him, challenged him, made him want to be better every day. No regrets? He whispered in the golden dimness. Ariane smiled, nestling closer into the warmth of his body. None, and you? Only one, he said, kissing the crown of her head. What? That it took me so long to admit you had possessed my heart since that first day in the garden. She laughed softly, the sound vibrating against his chest. Then we have an eternity to make up for lost time. An eternity, he agreed. And for the first time in years, Thane Whitlock, Duke of Grayfen, fell asleep with his heart completely at peace. Outside, Grayfen Castle slumbered beneath a star-strewn sky. Its ancient stones silent witnesses to a love that had risen from the ashes of solitude to become something eternal and true. 5 years had painted Grayfen Castle in colors Thane had never imagined possible. The sound of children's laughter echoed through corridors that once knew only solemn silence, and gardens that had once witnessed only his solitude now bloomed with the joy of a thriving family. Ariane, now 26, had become everything a duchess could aspire to be. Her beauty had matured like fine wine, but it was her wisdom and political grace that truly set her apart. At Thane's side, she navigated the complexities of court, with a deftness that had kings and ambassadors seeking her counsel. On this golden spring morning, she stood on the main terrace watching their 3 little treasures play in the gardens. Edward, 4 years old, had inherited his father's piercing gray eyes and already displayed an endearing seriousness as he tried to protect his younger sisters. The twins, Isabella and Catherine, 2 years old, were golden-haired whirlwinds scattering laughter wherever they went. They still managed to surprise me every day, Thane said, coming up behind her and wrapping her in his strong arms. Ariane leaned back against his chest, feeling the same safety and warmth she had felt in that first kiss in the garden so many years ago. Edward has organized an expedition to capture butterflies for the girls, she said with a soft laugh. He took the mission very seriously. Just like his father, Thane murmured, kissing the top of her head. Speaking of missions, I must meet with Balthor this afternoon. The trade negotiations with the Eastern Kingdoms require our attention. Our negotiations, she corrected, turning in his arms. You won't get rid of me so easily, Your Grace. Thane smiled, that smile reserved only for her, filled with love, pride, and a passion that the years had only deepened. I never intend to try again. Hours later, in the king's private chambers, Thane and Balthor shared wine as they reviewed state documents. The golden light of late afternoon filtered through the windows, creating an atmosphere of quiet camaraderie between the two men. The eastern provinces are eager to expand the spice trade, Balthor remarked, though his eyes studied Thane with a more personal interest. Ariane suggested an alternate route through the southern ports that could increase profits by 40%. She has a brilliant mind for strategy, Thane agreed, and there was in his tone a pride that made Balthor smile. You have changed, my friend, said the king, leaning back in his chair. 5 years ago, you were one of the most competent men in the realm, but there was a shadow in your eyes. Now, he gestured vaguely, now you shine like the sun. Thane considered the words as he savored his wine. Balthor, I must confess something to you. When you forced me into that marriage, I thought I was being punished for my past failures. But now I understand you gave me the greatest gift a man could ever receive. And what would that be? A second chance to be truly happy. A partner who not only complements my strength, but reveals strengths I never knew I possessed. Thane paused, his eyes softening. Ariane did not just give me children, Balthor. She gave me a life worth living. The king smiled with the deep satisfaction of one who had planted a seed and watched it bloom beyond even his boldest expectations. You were as stubborn as a mule, my old friend, obstinate in your grief, determined to remain in the eternal winter you had built around yourself. Balthor lifted his goblet in a silent toast. But I knew all you needed was the right companion to remind you that spring was still possible. And how did you know Ariane would be that companion? Because I recognized in her the same strength that exists in you, yet tempered with the light you had lost. I knew she would not bow before your walls. She would climb them, tear them down, and plant gardens where there had once been only stone. Thane chuckled softly, shaking his head in admiration and gratitude. "You are wiser than you deserve, Your Majesty. Or perhaps you were more predictable than you wish to admit." At that moment, as if summoned by their conversation, Ariane entered the royal chambers with Edward at her side and a twin in each arm. Her entrance instantly transformed the formal atmosphere into something warm and familiar. "Forgive me for interrupting," she said with a mischievous smile, but 3 little dukes demanded an audience with Uncle Balthor. The king rose. At once, arms outstretched to receive the children who rushed to him with cries of joy. Thane watched the scene, his wife radiant with happiness, his children safe and loved, his closest friend turned into a doting uncle, and felt his heart overflow with such profound gratitude it nearly left him speechless. Ariane came to him, slipping her hand into his with the ease born of years of perfect partnership. "What were you two speaking of with such seriousness?" she whispered. "Of how a man can be so fortunate in a single lifetime," he replied, lifting her hand to his lips for a tender kiss. "Fortunate?" She tilted her head, feigning consideration. "I prefer to think it was destiny, or perhaps magic." Magic? The magic of 2 hearts that found their way to each other through all of life's storms. As the sun set over the kingdom of Avarice, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, the ducal family returned to Grayfen Castle. The gardens that had once borne witness to the solitude of a broken man now echoed with the laughter of children and the gentle murmur of 2 lovers who had discovered that true love not only exists, it flourishes, grows, and becomes more beautiful with each passing day. And in the ancient towers of the castle, if one knew how to listen, one could still hear the echo of a promise made long ago on a starry night. An eternity to make up for lost time. A promise now being fulfilled, one precious day at a time. And so, dear listeners, did we manage to make you fall in love with Thane and Ariane as much as they fell in love with each other? Tell us in the comments. Which moment touched your heart the most in this story? And since we are speaking of great loves, share with us. Do you believe in love at first sight? Or do you prefer romances that grow slowly, like those of our dukes? Do not forget to like if this story warmed your heart, subscribe for more epic romances, and turn on the notification bell so you will not miss any of the romantic adventures we are preparing for you. Until the next love story.